Today's video, I'm going to cover 10 tips for becoming a smoother skater, skating more smoothly. So the first tip that I'm going to mention, I've got my notes again as usual. Check your wheels and bearings. So one reason why you might not be skating smoothly is if your wheels or bearings aren't really appropriate for your setup. So with your bearings, that's these things inside your wheels. These help your wheels roll more smoothly. Sometimes your bearings may get corroded, they may have junk in them, and they may be just not great bearings if you've got really cheap bearings. This bearing's a little bit, you can see it's a little bit slower. This is just an older bearing, so this is stopping more quickly. Another thing you could check is you want to make sure there's a little bit of wiggle room, very, very small amount, between the nut on your axle and the wheel. If you tighten this nut down too much, your wheel will not move. Also, your wheels, the bigger and softer your wheels are, generally the smoother the ride is going to be. So if you're on really tiny little wheels, you may want to step up your wheel size to get a little bit smoother. Tip number 2 is do less tic-tacs. I did not realize how much I was tic-tacking when I was skating like 10 years ago, and tic-tacs really kind of make your skating a little bit more chunky. It's, for lack of a better word, a tic-tac is this. And there's ways to tic-tac smoothly, and in fact, if you do the tic-tac motion without putting your front wheels on the ground, it's a spacewalk, or very similar to how a spacewalk looks, and I can't do that. That's a very cool looking trick. But a lot of times, if you are doing tic-tacs, it's gonna make your skating look a little bit less smooth. And if you're wondering how to stop tic-tacking, all these other factors will also help you tic-tac less. All these other tips will help you tic-tac less. Third tip is go slower. There's a phrase that I've heard before, but then I heard Mike Osterman mention it in regards to skating, and I never thought to apply it to skating. But the phrase is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So practice tricks going slowly first. Practice motions and maneuvers going slowly. When you get good at it going slow, you'll be really good at it going fast. Tip number 4. Use your arms and be mindful of your entire body when you're skating, including your shoulders. So, if you are doing tricks, use your arms, incorporate your arms. Don't let your arms distract from the trick, but use them to help you flow with a trick. So if I was going to do like a 360 endover, I'll do one without my arms out, or without really thinking about it. And then if you put your arms out, and I'm mindful of my shoulders more, you can kind of flow more with the trick. So remember that skating isn't just about your legs and your feet, it's your entire body. And really keep in mind and try to be aware of where your hands are, where your shoulders are, and where your head is, all of that kind of stuff. Your shoulders, wherever your shoulders are, tends to be where your board ends up going. So try to keep your shoulders over the board and parallel with the board. Next, we have tip number 5, and this is try to always be moving, and this kind of relates to the last tip. And this is something that I first heard from Kohn, who helps put on the US Freestyle Championships in Philly and does a lot in the skateboarding world, especially in the Philadelphia area. And this doesn't mean that you have to be constantly doing tricks and hard tricks. It just means be flowing, have something flowing with your body at all times. This is also in context to how to put together a really good freestyle run. Rather than doing a trick, pausing, setting up, and then doing the next trick, try to make everything flow into one another. So, for example, guess I can do more of these flowy footwork tricks. Even if I'm doing little tic-tacs and walks here, I know I said don't do as many tic-tacs. And this is kind of contradictory, I guess. So you want to do it. Tic-tacs are okay if they're intentional, but if they're meant to save a trick, that's when they tend to be they tend to interrupt your smoothness a little bit more. And be mindful of using your shoulders. So if you want to cheat a little bit, you can kind of use your shoulders and flow. And it's not even cheating, because it is still hard to do this kind of stuff. And a good place to look at is watch some longboard dancers skate. They tend to incorporate their entire body a lot more than like street skaters or other types of skaters. Tip number 6, practice getting tricks in a row, not just until you land. And this also means practice the basics. So when I was first starting to skate, my first 5 to 10 years of skating, I would work on tricks until I landed the trick, and then I would stop practicing it. I would basically try 360 flips until I got a 360 flip, and then I wouldn't do it anymore. And it wasn't until later on that I realized that this isn't very productive for helping me get smoother and better at the tricks. Really work on doing tricks that you can do and practice doing them more frequently in a row. So if you're having trouble learning something like a 360 flip, do more kickflips and varial flips and work on doing more of those more consistently. And then when you start to get the 360 flips, try and do multiple 360 flips in a row, or at least multiple per session. So frequency of landing is really important. And with working on the basics, that means even working on basic footwork, even if you think you're a more advanced skater, doing things like endovers and monster walks. And monster walks are just these. Work on your footwork, even if you think you can do it, because the more you work on it, the smoother you're going to get, and the more familiar you'll get with it, and you'll know how to transition that into other tricks. The next tip is number 7. Loosen your trucks a little bit. If you have too tight of trucks, it might be hard for you to keep your balance on your board, and vice versa, actually. So if your trucks are too loose, that might also hurt. So you should really maybe just adjust your trucks. I'll reword that tip to tighten your trucks if they feel really loose, loosen them if they're really tight, and if you don't know which way it is, do both. Try and tighten them a little bit more or loosen them a little bit more. And the reason I originally thought to loosen them is because I used to ride tighter trucks, and if I would land with a little too much weight on one side, I would tip over and come off the board, because I would try to lean the direction I wanted to go, and I wouldn't go that way, and my momentum would just move me over. When I loosened my trucks a little bit, it helps direct the energy that way, direct my motion in that direction. So my trucks aren't extremely loose, they're not tight though either. So I have just enough to carve a little bit. They're actually a little bit tighter now because I just replaced the bushings. And you can play around with what you think works best for you and trying that out. If the trucks are too loose, it might just be too hard to stay on the board though, and that could be throwing you off. Tip number 8. You may want to switch to a wider, larger board. For a while, I was skating, when I first started skating and when I was in like college, I remember I would skate like a 7.75 and I thought an 8 was wide. And then later on, I was skating a 7.5 for a little bit. And I found with the 7.5, my feet would just fall off the board. I couldn't keep my balance that well on it. And I thought about switching to a wider board. So right now I'm riding an 8.5, and I tend to go between an 8.4 to 8.5 size skateboard. And when I made this change, there are two main things I noticed. One, it was easier for me to land on the board, and I was more consistent with the tricks that I could do fairly consistently. The easier tricks, or my more basic tricks, got easier. The really technical tricks though, like the crazy amounts of flips and all that, that got harder to do on a smaller board. But on a bigger board, but that wasn't something I was doing consistently anyways. So it just helped me get smoother, and I just had to not work on maybe as crazy of flips as I was doing on a smaller, lighter board. That's also a tip I give to people when they're first getting out and getting started in skating, is you might want to start on a wider, larger board. A long board, for example, is very, very stable, but it's difficult to control, whereas a small board like a penny board is extremely easy to control, but very unstable. So if balance is an issue for you, you may want to switch to a wider board or a longer board. One other thing to note, if you're doing freestyle and you are doing rail stands, a wider board actually does not work in your favor in a rail stand, because the wider your board is, the taller it comes off the ground, which increases this distance, which means that you need less force to tip the board over. So you basically are increasing the size of your lever when you're in a rail stand, which isn't good, because that means that it's going to take less force to tip over. You can mitigate that with risers by separating the distance between the point where your wheel hits the ground and the edge of your deck. Tip number 9, practice skating switch. This is something I actually need to do still. I don't practice switch enough, and this is just really helpful for being able to flow any direction you want. So when you do something and you end up finding yourself riding switch or backwards, you are comfortable still. Skating switch is just going with the opposite foot forward. So I normally am regular where I put my left foot forward. Switch is when you put your right foot forward. And it's kind of fun. It's like starting skating all over again. So it can be frustrating at times. Some good things to do and work on though are your basics. So doing things like tic-tacs, manuals and wheelies, shove-its, simple tricks, switch ollies, things like that to help you practice going switch. The 10th and final tip for how to skate more smoothly is to use your momentum to inspire your flow. And that's like listening to your body and your board as you're skating, as you're coming out of a maneuver. It's using your intuition to figure out where to go next. And this is the hardest one for me to explain, because it's also a very personal tip, because what feels natural and intuitive for me might be different for you. And it's not about being logical necessarily, it's more about feeling. There might be little bits of logic and thought that you use to come up with ideas, like you might create a list of trick ideas, a laundry list of trick ideas to try out of a trick. But it requires you to look at where you are when you're done with the trick, and look at where you can go. Pay attention to the segues and what they're setting you up for, and work on landing or coming out of a trick in a setup for your next maneuver. Even if it's something as simple as a carve or a really simple piece of footwork, it's all the little details that really affect how smooth you look as a skater. So I'll do one example, and this might not be super smooth for me. The first one that's coming to mind is the 360 endover to nose manual, because 360 endovers are just this is a fun, simple trick, and this is maybe one that you can try if you're a little bit past the beginner stage. Because this is more of a segue trick, this is, if you're a beginner starting out, I'd focus on some of the other tips first, but if you're more of an intermediate to advanced skater, you can try this one out. 360 endover to nose manual. that's the 360 endover. And when I come out of that, I notice that it's pretty easy for me to just go into a nose manual or a manual, but for some reason the nose manual just felt better to me. And I might get greedy and try and do something out of the nose manual. I might not. I don't want to do this. I don't want to take a bunch of tries to do this. So I'll just try. I'll see what happens. If I feel like I'm set up perfectly for doing a shove it out of the nose manual, I'll do it. If not, I won't. So that could have been a little smoother. There was a little tick. There wasn't a tack, I don't think. It's just one tick in one direction. And then my loose trucks helped me to carve out of it so I didn't have to tic-tac a second time or put the tack in the tick. If that's how that works. Anyways, I hope that makes sense. That's definitely the hardest one for me to explain. And that was 10 tips for becoming more smooth, more fluid, honing in on your own style more. And I hope this helps you. This is something that I wish I had paid more attention to when I was starting out skating, and I hope it's finding you at the right time. Thank you for watching, and have fun skating. That's smooth.